Chapter 355. Ivik 2. The relationship between Ivik and Carmen started around 40 years ago. When Carmen had yet to become a black lion, she first met Ivik, who even then was a mercenary, when she was wandering around the continent under the pretext of training to be a knight. The strong are said to be able to recognize each other on sight. They had both been strong from a young age and saw it in each other as soon as they met. Although it might sound funny, through the clash of her fist against his blade, a bond was established between Carmen and Ivik. Ivik, who was defeated in their clash, accepted his defeat without any reservations and swore to respect Carmen as his big sis. Following this, they had several other entanglements. The Knights of the Black Lion were responsible for the Lionheart clan's dirty work. However, that wasn't the only significance of the Black Lion Knights' existence. The duty assigned to the Black Lion Knights by the Keel Empire was to guard the empire's southern border along the Uklas mountain range. Although the knights had no need to borrow the strength of mercenaries to fulfill their duty, they often sought the help of skilled mercenaries to act as a foreign invasion force during simulated drills. Because of this connection, Ivik had quite a deep relationship with Carmen, with the Lionheart clan. "I see there are some new faces here," Ivik commented. During Carmen's birthday a few months ago, the Lionhearts hadn't thrown any lavish parties, but Ivik had still visited them in their mansion with a few carefully selected gifts. After all, it wasn't like they were strangers, and since this was the birthday of the person he respected as his big sis, shouldn't Ivik at least bring her a present? Ivik had already become familiar with Carmen's disciple, Seal, and her squire, Desra, a while back, so it wasn't awkward for him to visit them. He had given Carmen a pleasant gift of an antique and elegant ashtray. Then, after having a few drinks together, Ivik had politely departed from the mansion. Ivik clearly remembered all the faces of the servants he had seen in the mansion at that time. Those servants had been hired upon the Lionheart's arrival in Shimuan, not brought along with them from the Lionheart clan. Ivik was sure that he couldn't recall seeing the faces of the three women standing behind Seal. "They don't seem like your average servants either," Ivik said assessingly. Even with Ivik's experienced eyes, he couldn't fully see through the magic cast by the wise Sienna. However, even though there was nothing strange to be seen in their outward appearance, Ivik's instincts, which had been honed through his real-life combat experience as a mercenary, could detect that there was something strange about these three. The feeling wasn't too obvious. It was just to the extent that he could easily tell that each of these three women had a slightly different air to them compared to ordinary people. However, that was already suspicious enough. Especially that one, Ivik thought to himself. Each of the three women had individual characteristics, but the one who caught Ivik's attention was a tall woman with golden hair and blue eyes. Her angular features that possessed a strange ability to attract a man's attention had definitely caught his eye, but it was the way she stood, looking as sharp as a drawn sword, that made her seem especially beautiful to him. Ivik eyed her carefully. "Although it's covered up by her clothing, so I can't get a good look. Just from the outline of her body, I can tell that this woman is a warrior. For a woman to have trained hard enough to possess physical definition, she didn't seem like just a simple servant." Once that suspicion had arisen, Ivik couldn't help but turn his gaze to the other two women. One of them had lush brown hair and eyes of the same color, but just by standing there quietly, she gave off a feeling of grace and nobility. And the woman standing next to her, with black hair and green eyes, was cutely blinking her wide eyes as she turned her head this way, trying to assess the situation. Ivik turned back to Eugene thinking, so this woman is their leader. He had noticed that the other two women were both looking at the first woman for their cue. Indeed, as a warrior of her level, it made sense that she was their leader. Having made these judgments, Ivik grinned. Carmen pondered for a few moments about how she should answer his question. She wasn't good at this sort of thing, with lies as a whole. Seal, well aware that Carmen had that kind of personality, quickly spoke up. "As expected of you, Sir Ivik. As you can see, the three behind me are no ordinary servants. They are the personal attendants of the main family who have undergone special training from the Lionheart clan." "Personal attendants?" Ivik repeated curiously. "Yes," Seal confirmed. "But to think that you would be able to see through them with just a glance. What on earth is she talking about?" Eugene thought as he stared at Seal in confusion. However, as if Seal had already thought all of this through beforehand, she continued speaking without any hesitation. "For this expedition, we Lionhearts aren't in a position to lend our support with our independent force. That is because, as Sir Ivik may already know, the Shimuan kingdom is determined to subdue Iris employing only their own armed forces. Ivik considered this. That's true. After all, no matter how great the Lionheart clan may be, they still belong to the Kiel Empire. And in fact, from the Emperor of Kiel's point of view, he should be happy that Shimuan has decided to sacrifice their own blood and flesh for this. Seal smiled. Yes, that's right. That's why, instead of sending our own independent troops, the Patriarch has sent his support in the form of a few individuals who are just as skilled as knights while not actually being knights. As skilled as knights while not actually being knights. Seal, I'm curious about what your standard is for these knights that you're speaking of, Ivik admitted, making no attempt to hide his intention of gaining their measure. But Seal just smiled brightly in response to his frank questioning. Naturally, my standards are based on the knights that I have seen while growing up. Ivik laughed. Ho ho. If that's the case, that means these young ladies are just as powerful as the Knights of the White Lion. Ivik had never actually been to the Lionheart clan's main estate. However, the Lionhearts were known as the strongest martial clan of all the clans on the continent. If these truly were personal attendants who had been trained directly by the descendants of the Great Vermouth from a young age, Ivik thought that it would indeed make sense for them to be skilled enough that they could look down on ordinary knights. Of course, this was a misunderstanding on Ivik's part. Among all the personal attendants who served the main line, there was not one who possessed exceptional martial skills at or above the level of a knight. For example, Nina, who had been lucky enough to be chosen as his personal attendant by Eugene when they were both younger and who now served him as the head maid of the annex. Even though she possessed exceptional skills with a kitchen knife, she had never once held anything longer than a knife in her entire life. Ivik sighed. Indeed. I understand what you're trying to say. However, I'm a bit disappointed. I was hoping that the famous Eugene Lionheart would come to take part in this expedition. Oh my, truly? Seal responded with feigned surprise, her expression not wavering in the slightest. Ivik nodded his head with a regretful expression as he replied, judging from the rumors, Eugene Lionheart seems like quite the wayward young man. And as befitting of the hero, he also seems to possess a strong hatred for demon folk. If it was someone like him, I thought for sure that he would ignore the will of the Empire and his clan to participate in this subjugation expedition. Seal laughed. Even though you have yet to actually meet him, it seems that you have a clear understanding of Eugene, Sir Ivik. You're right. Eugene is selfish and hard-headed. However, this time it seems that it just couldn't be helped. The same goes for the wise Lady Sienna as well. Ah, that's right. I did hear that the wise Lady Sienna is also staying with the Lionhearts. It's also very surprising that she didn't choose to come here either, Ivik said thoughtfully. It's the same case as Eugene. Lady Sienna isn't preparing for someone like the Rakshasa princess, Seal explained, because her goal is to slay the demon kings. It seems she doesn't want to provoke the demon kings by making any hasty moves. Seal has quite the skilled tongue, Sienna thought as she tried to keep her expression from changing. Ivik seemed to have been completely convinced by the smooth flow of Seal's speech. Nodding his head, he turned to look at Eugene and asked, "In that case, young lady, may I have your name?" Young lady? Did this bastard just call him a young lady? Rage boiled up deep within Eugene's chest. However, having come this far, Eugene couldn't just come up with a different story. So Eugene could only forcefully keep a hold of his angrily twitching cheeks. "My name is Eris." Christina was the first to break the silence. It was a different name from the one they had first agreed on. Christina had decided on the spot that it would be better to give Ivik another name than the obvious alias of Chris. Eris. Ivik repeated quizzically. "And your last name?" "We have been serving the Lionhearts ever since we were young, so we do not have a family name of our own," Christina claimed. "So that's the case," Ivik nodded, accepting the excuse without any doubts. After checking that Ivik didn't seem to have any further questions for Christina, Sienna also immediately introduced herself. "My name is Sian." Sierra was the pseudonym that they had decided on at first, but it seemed that Sienna had also decided to change her alias slightly. Though taking another look at it, all Sienna had done was stick the first and last syllables of her name, Sienna Meridian, together, but once again Ivik didn't seem to have any suspicions. In fact, it would be unreasonable for him to suspect that the wise Sienna might have disguised herself as a servant in the first place. "I am Yuri," Eugene eventually spat out, seeing no need to make any further changes to his pseudonym. This was because Eugene believed that it would be far too pitiful and miserable if he were forced to go so far as to hide his identity. Naturally, when he heard that name, Ivik didn't feel any doubt raising its head. Ivik's thinking wasn't flexible enough for him to imagine that Eugene Lionheart might actually cross-dress as a woman and disguise himself as a personal attendant of the main family to board this ship. If the introductions are over, why don't we head inside? Carmen, who had been watching all this take place, cleared her throat and made this suggestion. For some reason, Carmen felt sorry for how they were lying to Ivik. Big sis, that young lady named Yuri seems to be an extremely skilled individual. And that prideful and temperamental look on her face is also very attractive, Ivik whispered. Carmen frowned. What nonsense are you talking about? I'm just giving my honest opinion. Ivik defended himself. How old is she? She must be younger than you, right? Big sis, I'm just asking out of curiosity, but the personal attendants of the main family, are they allowed to fall in love with outsiders? Don't say something so disgusting. Unable to bear it any longer, Carmen quickly hastened her steps without meeting Ivik's eyes. Ivik clicked his tongue in disappointment before turning his head to look back at Eugene. Wait, should I just kill him? Eugene thought as his heart was filled with murderous intent. Come to think of it, there's something that I've been wanting to ask you for a while now, Seal said as she quickly stepped in front of Eugene. Her action was meant to keep Ivik from seeing how Eugene's expression was contorting into a scowl. Seal asked, Sir Ivik's nickname is the Mercenary King, right? That's what everyone calls me, Ivik confirmed. Although it is true that in an era like this, where it's tough for mercenaries to make a living, there aren't any other mercenaries as strong as I am. The world was at peace without any major wars. The only battlefields where mercenaries had room to ply their trade were the territory disputes between nobles. So if any mercenary wanted to make a lot of money, their only real option was to go to Helmuth, where there was a plethora of battles to take part in. After all, how many jobs for a mercenary could there be that were both easy and made a lot of money? At the very least, for jobs with harsh requirements on the body like being a mercenary, higher pay also came with a higher risk of injury. That was precisely what Helmuth's battlefields were like. It wasn't easy for human mercenaries to survive on a battlefield where both demon folk and demonic beasts were roaming around. In other words, in this current era, the mercenary world could be said to be going through a recession. But even in such an era, Ivik was still called the Mercenary King. Seal finally asked, What do you think of Sir Hamel, Sir Ivik? Seal had asked this question to bring some comfort to Eugene's current mood. From what Seal had seen of him, it seemed natural that someone like Ivik Slad would respect Hamel, who had made a name for himself as one of the great heroes 300 years ago. Ivik frowned. Hamel? Are you talking about the stupid Hamel? Seal nodded. Yes, wasn't he also a legendary mercenary? Ivik paused. As you say, Seal, it is true that Hamel was a legendary mercenary. Throughout history, there shouldn't be any mercenary as impressive as Hamel. Eugene's expression lightened up slightly due to Ivik's response. Seal nodded. As expected, that means Sir Ivik also looks up to Sir Hamel, right? Ivik shrugged. Not really. Eugene's face slowly hardened as he listened to Ivik's following explanation. I do regard him as a great, even legendary mercenary, but I don't look up to him. No, honestly speaking, I'm not sure that Hamel should even be considered a mercenary, Ivik argued. Seal gasped. Huh? But didn't you just say he was a legendary mercenary? Well, I did say that, but Hamel, the stupid Hamel, Ivik hesitated. I'm not trying to disregard his accomplishments. However, those accomplishments weren't achieved during his time as a mercenary, now were they? They were accumulated during his time as a companion of the Great Vermouth. But was he really in a position to say this? There wasn't actually anything factually wrong in what Ivik had just said. However, sometimes a person telling the truth without any omissions was more annoying and infuriating than a blatant liar. If you want to know who I look up to, then, rather than Sir Hamel, I actually look up to Sir Molan, Ivik confessed. The brave Molan, just how manly is that title? If I had to pick one thing I feel the most regret and disappointment about in my entire life, it would be not attending the night march. I didn't even think about going because I heard that it was going to be held in the distant and chilly northern end of the continent, but to think that Sir Molan would actually make an appearance there. This bastard must just carry his head around as a decoration. Even though Ivik bore the title of the mercenary king instead of looking up to Hamel, he actually admired Molen. And what else did he say? He said that stupid bastard was more manly? Fools of a feather really do flock together. Eugene ground his teeth as he walked behind Seal. Lady Yuri, may I ask why you keep grinding your teeth? Ivik asked in concern. It's a habit, Eugene snapped back. As a personal attendant, shouldn't she pay more attention to her appearance? This question ran through Ivik's head for a moment, but he didn't think about it for too long. It must be that Yuri's skills as a warrior were so good that some measure of flaws were overlooked. So instead of putting him off, this affirmation of her skills made Ivik's heart pound even harder. So then, Ivik, what exactly did you want to talk to me about? Carmen asked as they arrived at her spacious cabin and she took her seat. If possible, I was hoping that this talk would be kept to just the two of us. Oh well, I guess it would be strange for you to be suspicious of your own family, Ivik said with a shrug as he sat across from Carmen. Carmen picked up something from his words. You're uncomfortable with Lord Ortis? But you're not the type who would try to skirt around Lord Ortis's authority for such a simple reason. You should already be aware of this, big sis, but at first, Lord Ortis turned a blind eye to the pirate empress plundering, Ivik said accusingly. But that wasn't Lord Ortis's arbitrary decision now, was it? Carmen countered. It was the royal family as a whole that condoned the pirate empress' actions. Of course that might be the case, but it's not like Lord Ortis has a clear conscience when it comes to this issue of the pirate empress, does he? Over the past year, the pirate empress has mostly plundered merchant vessels while avoiding all official vessels, Ivik said with a snort as he clenched the fingers of both hands together. Did you know? It's not widely known to the public, but a distant relative of Lord Ortis runs a merchant firm. In this regard, Lord Ortis is quite thorough. He has actually managed to clean up all the traces so that the firm appears to have no connection back to him. Carmen frowned. What are you trying to say? Isn't it obvious what the full story is? The merchant firm connected to Sir Ortis not only served the Empress plundering, but it actually prospered. Coincidentally, the amount of tribute being offered to Lord Ortis also increased around that time. And if that's just what can be seen on the surface, what's being hidden in the unseen depths? Ivik asked suggestively. How did you find out about this matter? Carmen questioned. If you want to do well at the top and keep your footing, you need to know how to make good use of your mercenaries, Ivik stated smugly. Instead of replying, Carmen chewed the cigar held between her lips. She didn't really enjoy talking about matters like this. This was because such matters that dealt with dirty reality were far distant from her own sense of chivalry, and there was little romance to be found in them. I understand what you're trying to say, Carmen eventually responded. However, doesn't such an issue exist because the royal family thought they could tame the pirate empress? Now that the empress has turned against the royal family, no, this whole country, they can only be enemies. That might be the case, but we still can't be sure that all of the dirty deals between the empress and Lord Ortis have been fully settled, Ivik warned. Deals? Carmen repeated suspiciously. Ivik replied, you might think of it like this. What if Sir Ortis had designs on a higher seat than the one he is currently sitting on as the Grand Duke? Are you suggesting that Sir Ortis might have joined hands with the Empress in order to plot a rebellion? Carmen fiercely demanded with narrowed eyes. In response to Carmen's blatant intimidation, Ivik quickly shook his head. I'm just raising my suspicions with you because I'm usually quite cautious. Though I don't think something like this is all that unlikely, Ivik insisted. That means you don't have any proof, Carmen pointed out. Ivik sniffed haughtily. Isn't the fact that he had dealings with the Empress in the first place proof enough? While silently listening to the ongoing conversation, Eugene recalled what he had seen of Ortis during the night march. At that time, Ortis hadn't denied that some kind of deal had been arranged between Iris and Shimuan. However, that being said, he hadn't revealed that he had also made a deal with Iris. Well, it could be that he just didn't want to expose his shameful behavior. That was also my first time meeting him, Eugene conceded. That said, Ortis' goal had been clear. He wanted to enlist Eugene's help in subjugating Iris. Was it all for Shimuan's sake? Or was it just because they had failed to tame Iris? Those might be some of his reasons, but if Ortis really has joined hands with Iris, he might have been trying to lure me into a trap, Eugene realized. He couldn't be sure of this, but it was still something to be wary of. Since you don't seem to like hearing about such uncertain topics, big sis, why don't we talk about something different? Ivik suggested as he leaned forward. The Empress is actually digging up the seabed. Carmen raised an eyebrow. Digging up the seabed? It seems like she's looking for something buried deep below the sea, Ivik revealed. 1. Romance in the sense of a quality or feeling of mystery, excitement and remoteness from everyday life. Chapter 356, Ivik 3. Deep below the sea. Upon hearing these words, Eugene unconsciously clenched his fist as the scene he had been shown through Agarotha's vision filled his mind. The staggeringly large number of corpses. The wave that was so high and wide that it blocked out the sky. The sea fog so thick that it was impossible to see anything further than an inch away from your face. Advancing ahead of the wave, the sea fog had covered up the whole world. The wave that had washed up behind the fog then swallowed everything left into its depths. The divine revelation had ended there. After that, Eugene had tried several more times to call for another divine revelation, but Agarotha's ring hadn't shown him anything else. According to Gundor and the theologians, there used to be a holy site of Agaroth at the very end of the southern seas, close to the distant seas. A very long time ago there was once land there, but due to a supernatural phenomenon whose exact origins were unknown, the land had been transformed into a sea. In other words, that meant Agarotha's holy site was somewhere on the seabed, deep below the sea. And the Salgalta Sea also happened to be located at the very end of the southern seas. Iris was digging up the seabed and searching for something buried there. Eugene couldn't imagine that this was just a coincidence. Something buried below the sea? Carmen asked. Eugene wasn't in a position to take control of the conversation, but before Eugene had even given her a signal, Carmen had spoken up to pursue the topic. What on earth could be hidden below the sea? She continued with the questions. Now that's the question, isn't it? Ivik said with a chuckle as he sat up straight in his seat. She's definitely looking for something, but even the Empress herself doesn't seem to know what exactly that something is. Carmen frowned. She doesn't even know herself? The Empress might be lying, but from what I've managed to find out, that seems to be the case, Ivik confirmed. Where exactly are you getting your information? Carmen demanded with narrowed eyes. Eugene agreed with Carmen's choice of question. In terms of peculiar behavior, Carmen might be comparable to Melkith, but no, was he being too harsh on Carmen? You were indeed being too harsh, Hamel, Tempest suddenly chimed in from inside Eugene's head. This prideful spirit king of the wind was usually so reticent that Eugene sometimes got confused whether he was still there or not. But whenever Eugene thought about Melkith, Tempest would immediately make his presence known, just like clockwork. Take right now for example. Tempest continued. Carmen Lionheart might be eccentric, but she's not a lunatic. Eugene also shared Tempest's opinion. First of all, Carmen had never meditated in the nude at the lakeside. Secondly, during serious conversations like this one, Carmen could set aside the character concept she was obsessed with and lived by. Just look at her now. Since entering this room, Carmen Lionheart hadn't taken out her lighter even once. It's from my men, of course, Ivik stated confidently. Ivik, you do realize that those words put all sorts of thoughts into my mind, Carmen warned coldly, the air in the room changing as she spoke. Carmen put the pocket watch, the Heaven Genocide, hanging from her belt onto the table and kept her hands on it. Through this gesture, Carmen was laying her potentially hostile intentions out in the open. Unlike what you may be thinking, big sis, I've never cooperated with the Empress. I'm not that brazen, Ivik immediately denied without avoiding Carmen's gaze. My men snuck in when the Empress first began rallying the pirates and mustering up her own forces. I was just making preparations for the future. According to common sense, a pirate? No, my mistake. It's not like the Empress could be considered a mere pirate from the very beginning. In any case, after she, the Rakshasa princess, came all the way out to sea to become a pirate and started building up a force under her command, once you use common sense to think about it, you would realize that Shimuan would eventually be left with no choice but to subjugate such a force. Ivik was a mercenary. Whether in the past or the future, the way mercenaries made money was still the same. They had to go out and fight on the battlefield. Ivik sighed mournfully. Big sis, you and I have known each other for quite a while now. Maybe it's because of that, but I felt extremely saddened when you suspected me just now. Do you really see me as a bastard without any guts who would secretly join hands with the demon folk, big sis? Carmen scoffed. Mercenaries always chase after money, don't they? Haha. If they're just third-rate mercenaries, then yes, but I am the first class among the first class. I can earn money wherever I go, and it's not like I don't have some funds saved up. So by now, what's the point of earning even more money? Ivik let out a loud laugh before continuing to speak. What the first-class mercenaries pursue are trust, contracts, and honor. Ultimately, I think the pirate empress Iris is just a loser, don't you? 300 years ago, she was defeated and forced to flee by the Great Vermouth and his companions, and in the modern day she was defeated and forced to flee by the Queen of the Night Demons. Well, you have to admit that she is strong, but all that still means she's not a client worth signing a contract with. There's nothing to be gained from following her. How impressive, Ivik, Carmen complimented with a smile. The cold air in the room changed back to normal. Carmen let go of her pocket watch and then spread her arms wide. Clap, clap, clap. Loud applause rang out 3 times. I've never doubted you, I was testing you, Carmen stated calmly. If you say so, Ivik said with a shrug. As expected of my big sis. Ivik accepted Carmen's claim without any arguments. Then, before Carmen could say anything else, Ivik quickly continued speaking. In any case, I planted my subordinates in her forces in the belief that the subjugation of the pirate empress would surely take place someday. I've placed them in a position that isn't too close but where they can still listen to the empress orders directly. Having some distance is better because if they get too close, they'll just earn even more suspicion. In the first place, humans could not become Iris' most trusted subordinates. From 300 years ago until now, the only ones Iris had ever truly opened up to and kept by her side were her fellow Dark Elves. There were currently thousands of pirates under Iris' command. However, the Dark Elves numbered only 100 at the very most. No matter how keen the ears of the Dark Elves were, it was impossible for them to listen to and control the tongues of thousands of pirates. Ivik got back to the point. The Salgalta Islands aren't a place fit for humans to live. You can still catch some fish like in the other seas, but how can people live on fish alone? Whether disposing of their stolen goods or replenishing necessary materials, Iris needed her pirates to regularly sail to other seas. Ivik's men were hiding among the pirates who had taken on such a role. They periodically sent letters to Ivik to inform him about the Empress' current situation. The latest report that Ivik had received was from 2 days ago. It explained that the reason the Empress had kidnapped the dwarves of Hammer Island was to find something buried below the sea. However, it looked like even the Empress herself didn't know what this something was, and the pirates who served her wouldn't dare to question her about it. Ivik continued, At first I thought her goal was the ships that have sunk to the bottom of the Salgalta Sea. As you're probably already aware, Big Sis, there are rumors that a dragon's lair lies hidden within that sea. I don't know whether or not that is true, but it is a fact that dozens of attempts have been made to find the dragon's treasure, only for their ships to be lost at sea. The treasure lost within those sunken ships should add up to quite a considerable sum. In truth, wearing the diving suits that they had made while under Iris' constant harassment, the dwarves had managed to reach the seabed and retrieve the contents of numerous sunken vessels. Ivik shook his head, but the Empress' goal doesn't lie in the sunken ships. That crazy dark elf isn't interested in the seafloor. She's digging for something below that. At first she only had the dwarves doing it, but starting 2 days back she had a lot more diving suits made, and now she's making her pirates do the work as well. Just what on earth could she be trying to do? Carmen questioned with a frown. She probably doesn't know the answer to that question herself yet, Ivik said with a shrug. From making the Salgalta Sea her base to kidnapping the dwarves, that means everything that the Empress has done is connected, Carmen muttered as she rubbed her chin. Perhaps the Empress really has just gone mad, Ivik joked. This might just be idle chatter, but apparently, the reason the Empress started digging up the seafloor might be due to a dream? A dream. Carmen repeated. That's right, a dream. I don't know what kind of dream the Empress received, but the dream has apparently guided her to something that is buried below the sea. Although that might all just be made-up nonsense, Ivik muttered as he started absently rummaging through his pockets. In a gesture that seemed habitual, Ivik pulled out a pack of cigarettes, only to realize what he had done and put the packet back into his pocket after clearing his throat. Ivik changed the subject. How does this whole situation look to you, Big Sis? There's more than a few suspicious points, right? That is indeed the case, Carmen agreed. After a pause she continued, I don't want to suspect Sir Ortis, but there is a need to be cautious. After all, it is hard to judge what exactly the Empress is up to in Salgalta. Unfortunately, now that I've also gone out to sea, we won't be able to receive any more reports from my spies, Ivik said regretfully. What exactly do you want? Carmen asked as she placed her cigar back between her lips, uncaring that Ivik had just finished putting his own pack of cigarettes away. You should have a clear purpose for informing me, no, informing the Lionhearts of all this. With how many people there are in this fleet, who do you think will ultimately be able to take the head of the Empress? Ivik asked with a grin. In contrast to his sunburnt skin, Ivik's teeth were so clean and white they practically glowed. Princess Scalia? Ivik scoffed. Haha, I'm sure that's what the royal family are hoping for. Princess Scalia isn't a contender for the throne, so it won't be a problem even if she does succeed, as her achievements can be claimed purely by the royal family. However, there's no way that a delicate flower like her, who was appointed to the position of the Princess Knight, will be able to take the Empress' head. Her own aide would be more likely to decapitate the Empress than Princess Scalia. Ivik was referring to Ortis' son, Dior Hyman. He may have been assigned to serve as Princess Scalia's aide, but Dior's skills were unquestionably superior. He didn't appear to stand out on the surface, but that was because Dior was apt at hiding his skills. In reality, Dior had been able to detect Eugene's gaze even from a great distance away. As for Prince Jaffer, who has followed along out of greed, he's an even more unlikely suspect, Ivik sneered. For him to have boarded the ship while relying on his swordsmanship that can also be described as having trained to the hobbyist level, indeed, he truly must be desperate. That, and he also won't be able to seriously contend for the kingship if he can't take the Empress' head. Or perhaps HM. My apologies if this offends you, Seal, but the prince might have some dirty ideas in mind for you. Do you really think Prince Jaffer will try to assault me during our voyage? Seal asked with a hearty laugh. Unless he's crazy, how dare he do something like that? Assault would be going too far, but he might still try to flirt with you during the voyage, Ivik warned. Let's just cut it off, Carmen muttered dangerously. I'll skewer it, Desra spat out. I'll beat him to death, Eugene also thought to himself. Ivik got back to the main point. Well, those two definitely stand no chance. In my view, only 3 people might be able to take the Empress' head. Big Sis Carmen, Lord Ortis, and me, of course. It would be difficult to solo her, Carmen pointed out. That's for sure, Ivik agreed. I'm also not arrogant enough to think that I would be able to slay the Empress in a one-on-one. However, isn't that just how it goes? The important thing is who gets the final blow. Who will, personally, behead the Empress. The only ones who could make a move at that moment are the 3 of us. Carmen raised an eyebrow. You're not asking me to step aside and just let you have the honors, are you? Ivik chuckled. Huh. If you were willing to do so, I'd be grateful, but even I think that would be too big of a request to make of you. Big Sis, I'm not asking for anything too heavy. I just want the 2 of us to work together. So that's the case, Carmen suddenly said, lowering the cigar once more. Ivik, you're worried that Sir Ortis might be aiming for your neck. Eugene also shared the same thought. Today was his first meeting with Ivik, but his attitude of caution towards Ortis had been very consistent. As expected of a mercenary, Eugene secretly nodded. First-class mercenaries pursue trust, contracts, and honor. Those were some good words. When your skills were exceptional and you had more than you needed to survive, your eyes were bound to turn towards abstract things such as those. However, in the end, the mercenary profession at its core was an act of selling your body and killing other people. In Eugene's eyes, Ivik Slad might not be a good person, but he was definitely a good mercenary. Even though he killed others to fill his stomach, Ivik didn't chafe at the restraints of peacetime, and he knew how to cover his own back. If I were Lord Ortis, I would stab myself in the back sometime during this subjugation expedition, Ivik admitted with a grin. Because that way things would be nice and easy for him. As the second-ranked, I am able to challenge Lord Ortis' orders at any time, and in some ways my standing in Shimuan is even better than that of Lord Ortis. Under such circumstances, what if I were to take the Empress' head as well? Wouldn't it be possible that a mercenary brat like me might just end up sitting in a seat next to this country's Grand Duke? Does that stroke your ambition? Carmen questioned. Ivik shook his head. No, I'm not really interested in a grandiose position like the Grand Duke's. However, I don't trust that Lord Ortis will just be able to see through my true feelings on this matter on his own, and I'm also doubtful that I'll be able to properly convey my intentions to him during this voyage. I understand what you're driving at, Ivik, Carmen said as she slowly reached out one hand. I'm not sure whether Lord Ortis really does want to kill you or if he truly is colluding with the Empress. I can't be sure of anything yet. However, I don't want to see any of us, who have gathered together for the purpose of subjugating the Empress, go for each other's throats. Big sis, Ivik uttered gratefully. Make sure not to leave my sight during the battle, Ivik, Carmen declared firmly, even as she gave a shiver of self-satisfaction at her prideful words. As long as you stay within my eyesight, I'll ensure you don't die. Ivik was silent for a few moments, unsure of how he should respond to her promise. Ivik regularly used 3 weapons: a sword, a spear, and a bow. Among these 3, the one that Ivik used the most was the bow. On the other hand, Carmen usually ran into the melee while swinging her fists. While it was common for Carmen to be able to stay within Ivik's field of view on the battlefield, it was rare for Ivik to stay within Carmen's field of view. As expected of you, big sis, Ivik said, cleanly giving up on his previous complicated line of thought. Returning her smile, Ivik clasped Carmen's hand. With this, Ivik could rest assured. Was that son of a bitch Ortis really colluding with Iris? Even Ivik wasn't too sure. But it was true that, until just a few months ago, Ortis had been making a fortune by receiving kickbacks from Iris. That was why he was suspicious of Ortis. Would that son of a bitch Ortis really try to kill him? Ivik didn't know that either. However, the battlefield was a place where all sorts of shit was doomed to occur. Among all of the things that could happen, people deliberating killing someone on the same side as they were on was a fairly common thing. However, Big Sis definitely isn't that kind of person, Ivik thought in relief. Carmen was someone who was absolutely trustworthy when it came to matters like this. Satisfied, Ivik let go of Carmen's hand. As Ivik got up, he turned to face Eugene. Now then, it was Miss Yuri, correct? Eugene, who had been deep in thought, felt a chill running down his spine when he heard himself being called Miss Yuri. Ivik began, could I interest you in a meal to get lost? Eugene's lips trembled as he held back the urge to finish saying those words. Barely managing to swallow the reply he had been about to make, Eugene gritted out a different response. I'm afraid not. Eugene had done a good job holding himself back. There were more than a few times when Eugene had wanted to intervene in the conversation. However, Eugene still held back every time. He had also been left with a lot to think about from this. After making sure that Ivik had returned to his own ship once he left the room, Eugene let out a deep sigh and sat down on the sofa. What a world, Eugene lamented. Christina silently approached him and draped the cloak of darkness around Eugene. Sienna, who had also walked over, released the spell that had been cast on him. Pop 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 pop. This was the sound of Eugene's compressed muscles returning to their original appearance. Eugene let out a deep breath of relief as he changed his clothes beneath the protection of the cloak. It seems my request was a bit excessive, Seal mumbled while noticing Eugene's distress. No, don't worry about it, Eugene reassured her even as he kept taking deep breaths. By dressing him up as a woman, they had definitely managed to completely deceive anyone who might have been paying attention to their movements. Especially after learning that Ortis, the commander of this expedition, had some suspicious aspects. Having boarded the ship while perfectly disguising Eugene's identity had turned out to be a huge advantage. I really can't understand Iris' motivations, Eugene thought while idly playing with his hair, which had been returned to its original length. There was no way for him to know what that dark elf might be truly searching for. And a dream? Really? Was it really just idle chatter? Or was Iris truly looking for something that she had seen in her dreams? Finding the dragon's lair to use its treasure to fund her military. That's the easy explanation, Eugene continued thinking. Could it be that Iris was also searching for Agrotha's holy site? So why? How could she have found out about it? Eugene pondered these questions in silence. It was still only a few hours after their departure. They would have to stay at sea for about a month longer. During that time, Iris would continue to dig up the seabed. Eugene didn't know what Iris was looking for, but this meant that they were giving Iris some time to look for it. Modern ships were built to be very fast. With magic added on top of that, they could be even quicker. Even so, it would still take a month. If they wanted to sail even faster, there was indeed a method to do so. However, there were still suspicions regarding Ortis to deal with. Eugene silently closed his eyes before finally saying, "Let's infiltrate the Laversia in 3 days. 1. This refers to his rank as the second of Shimuan's 12 finest. Chapter 357, The Laversia, 1. Are you having difficulties going to sleep once again? 3. This was the question Scalia was met with the moment she opened her bedroom door, along with the heavily concerned face of her aide. Her aide was Lord First Ortis' son Dior Hyman. While gazing at Princess Scalia's face, Dior held back a bitter sigh. A knight who had reached the stage of being able to freely control their mana was able to adjust their own body to efficiently relieve their fatigue. However, that didn't mean they could still stay in good shape after not getting any sleep day after day. On top of that, Princess Scalia's level wasn't even high enough for her to have mastered complete control of her bodily functions. Even though she should have just gotten out of bed, Scalia was wearing a thin layer of makeup. This was due to Scalia's devotion to living up to her nickname as the Princess Knight that the public had bestowed upon her. Thanks to her makeup and the darkness of the night, neither her sallow skin from staying up all night for the past few days nor the dark circles that now stretched down to her cheeks could be seen. "I am getting enough sleep," Scalia coldly insisted. In the end, faced with this hoarse-voiced reply, Dior was left with no choice but to let out a sigh. Her obvious and stubborn lie was causing Dior all sorts of headaches. "As your liege, I'm the one who should be questioning what my aide is doing outside my bedroom in the early hours of the morning," Scalia said accusingly. Dior began to explain, "I am your highness' aide as such I." Scalia didn't wait for him to finish. "There is no need for you to worry about us. We are getting more than enough sleep and rest, and we are out here at this time because we wish to enjoy the sea breeze at night." "Your Highness," Dior pleaded. "As my aide, do you have no intention of listening to your liege's orders?" If that's the case, just follow closely behind us until you see the truth of the matter for yourself." As she swept past Dior, Princess Scalia sarcastically suggested, "If you are still not satisfied with our behavior, then why don't you go and make a report to Lord Ortis?" Dior bit his tongue at this scathing remark. "If you are not going to stop me, then why don't you just give in and turn a blind eye to everything?" Scalia suggested with a sneer. .0. "I have no intention of reporting you to the captain," Dior stiffly replied. "After all, I haven't done so thus far." At this reply, Scalia let out an obvious snort of contempt. Instead of confronting Dior any longer, she began walking out onto the deck. All Dior intended to do was watch her back. This was nothing new. From the very beginning, Dior Hyman had been assigned such a role. In case of an emergency, Dior was strong enough to draw his sword and fight in Scalia's stead. He was to obey her unconditionally despite being subjected to Scalia's irritation and dissatisfaction, and he was to report all of Scalia's actions to their superior, Ortis. Also, if hypothetically speaking he and Princess Scalia were to fall in love, that might push him into a role where he could serve as an even larger pair of wings to help elevate Ortis' position. Years before he had been first appointed as Scalia's aide, Dior had perfectly understood what his role was to be. From a young age he had been taught that he should never go against his father's orders and that his entire existence should be devoted to his father's, no House Hyman's glory. So originally, Princess Scalia's eccentricities should have already been reported to his father. That was part of the orders that Dior had been given. However, Dior hadn't made any reports. He hadn't said anything about what had happened in the snowfields on the way to the night march, how Princess Scalia had committed a massacre, nor had he said anything about the secret hobbies that Princess Scalia had indulged in upon returning to Shimuan. Dior hadn't reported any of that to his father. What would have happened to Princess Scalia if he had made a report? Probably, most likely, she would have been locked up in one of the towers of the royal palace. No, Dior reconsidered this. Ortis wouldn't be able to gain anything from doing so. Most likely he would use the evidence of her actions to control Princess Scalia, or if he decided to be even bolder about it, Ortis could blackmail the royal family by threatening to expose her crimes to the public. Dior was unhappy with either option. Was it for Princess Scalia's sake? Could it be that he was truly satisfied with his current situation, serving as the princess aide and following her around wherever she went, and as such wanted to protect this way of life? That wasn't it either. To put it bluntly, Dior didn't have any interest in what might become of Princess Scalia. There was only one reason he hadn't sent any reports regarding her. It was just an act of rebellion against his father, Ortis. This insane woman, Dior cursed to himself. Apart from using her to satisfy his rebellious spirit against Ortis, Dior couldn't care less about Scalia. This insane woman. Just like what he thought of her in the privacy of his own head, in Dior's view, Scalia was a lunatic. Initially, she had been up to all sorts of shit while carefully hiding it behind her outer appearance as the Princess Knight. But after that incident in the snowfield, it seemed that the dividing line that kept her from betraying her own public image had disappeared entirely. Dior had been waiting in front of Scalia's door, and following her on her nightly walks was all because he was worried that Scalia might do something crazy. Unlike one of the vagrants you might find in a back alley or a low-priced mercenary, if she were to skewer one of the crew sailing this ship, he wouldn't be able to take care of their corpse. Scalia's head was throbbing and her vision was shaking nauseously. It had nothing to do with the fact she was out at sea, riding on a ship. It was her brain desperately pleading for her to get some sleep after going for days without any rest. But that didn't mean she could simply fall asleep comfortably just because her body wanted her to. As a result, her patience was growing ever thinner. She didn't like the sounds coming from Dior, who was trailing behind her. She was also angered by how the soldiers standing guard in the distance kept glancing over to stare at her. And the way that the lookout perched high up on the mast of the ship was looking down at her was also triggering a dark impulse to surge up from the bottom of Scalia's heart. Scalia bit her lip to keep from shouting something. In the past it hadn't been as bad as this. When a person felt angry or frustrated, it wasn't all that uncommon for them to relieve their stress by throwing something or hitting someone. Scalia had done something similar. Whenever she was tense or angry, she would imagine executing all sorts of violent acts inside her head. Of course, while the executioner of that violence was always Scalia herself, the types of people she had imagined serving out this violence to changed every time she imagined it. But it had only ever been in her imagination. She had never actually acted on her urges. However, after having finally sated this urge once, her desires had gradually grown stronger. It was as if she had finally realized that it was okay for her to do whatever she wanted. Scalia was aware that she was slowly getting weirder and weirder. That was why she was currently keeping herself from doing anything and was instead trying to soothe her cravings by going out on a walk. She might hate Dior and find him annoying, but she also felt slightly relieved that Dior was following along behind her. If Dior hadn't accompanied her out onto the deck, she felt like she might not have been able to stand it any longer and would have finally done something in the end. Scalia lifted her head to look at the night sky with a sigh, trying to steady her dizzy head and calm her racing heart. It had been 3 days since they had set off. Looking up at it from the middle of the sea, the night sky was beautiful with countless shining stars along with the dazzling moonlight. Floating in the air not far from her, Eugene whispered, "It felt like our eyes met, but she hasn't really seen us, right?" "Don't say something so ridiculous," Sienna scoffed from her position at Eugene's side. Although this might be stating the obvious, Sienna took great pride in her magical skill. While shooting Eugene an annoyed glance, she poked him in the side with her staff. Sienna scolded him, "You cheeky disciple, how dare you doubt your master's skill in magic? How could a mere knight who hasn't learned any magic see through my spell?" "Ahem," Eugene grunted. "That might be the case, but there's also an arch-wizard on board that ship, isn't there?" "Humph." Sienna snorted. "He's not even an arch-wizard from Arath, which could be called the birthplace of magic, but instead just someone who has become satisfied with his position as the commander of the court wizards in an island country at the very southern tip of the continent. How talented could someone like that even be?" In order to ensure that this subjugation expedition would surely succeed, Shimuan had dispatched the main forces that were usually stationed in the royal palace. Not only had they sent Ortis, first of the 12 finest knights and the Knights of the Violent Tide, but they had even dispatched the 8th Circle Archwizard, commander of their court wizards, Maze Briar. Their final destination, the Salgalta Sea, was an area that heavily restricted the use of magic. Perhaps because they were aware of this, Maze was the only wizard dispatched along with this fleet. They must have been hoping that, as an 8th Circle Archwizard, he might still be able to use his magic in the Salgalta Sea. Though they might all share the title of Archwizards, not all Archwizards are on the same level, Sienna explained. Especially after the circle magic formula created by me, the wise Lady Sienna, became the standard for all wizards. "My disciple, You should have seen this as well, haven't you? I've experienced that gap personally, Eugene confirmed. That's right. Aratha's Green Tower Master. Just what kind of archwizard is that? To think that this is an era where a worm without the majesty or mystique of an archwizard can be called an archwizard because they had the fortune to meet a good master who was able to efficiently and expediently teach them magic, allowing them to break into the 8th circle. Sienna viciously spat out before glancing at Eugene with a regretful expression. Ah, of course I'm not referring to you, my disciple. Ahem. As your master, I believe you can still proudly call yourself an archwizard. Though you haven't reached enlightenment through your personal in-depth research on magic and were only able to reach your current level of magic thanks to the Lionheart's white flame formula and, the witchcraft created by your master, but even so, well, why don't you just stop there? Eugene suggested drily. Like I thought you really are a cheeky disciple. Even though your master is giving you some rare compliments, you're still talking back to me so rudely, Sienna muttered as she glared at Eugene. What an annoying guy. Although it might be true that she had added all sorts of comments at the end, Sienna hadn't said anything she didn't mean. In Sienna's unbiased opinion, Eugene's signature spell, Prominence, was extremely impressive. If we go down any further than this, we'll be caught by their barrier, Carmen, who was also flying along with them, warned them. This was the flagship of the subjugation force, the most powerful battleship owned by the royal family, and yet they were still here to infiltrate the Laversia. They had even managed to convince Carmen of why they had to do it this way. The ships from 300 years ago were nothing compared to the ships of the modern day that were even enhanced further with magical technology, so the speed of the subjugation expedition was already plenty fast. However, if Sienna's magic was added on top of that, they could become even faster. Then there were the suspicions regarding Ortis. One method to deal with this problem was to maintain constant vigilance against him, but Eugene believed it would be a whole lot easier and much more comfortable to just subdue Ortis in advance. Carmen had also come to agree with this fact to a certain extent. In the first place, one of the purposes of the Black Lion Knights that Carmen commanded was to punish those guilty of such similar suspicions when they appeared within the family and also to protect the discipline and laws of the clan. However, Ortis wasn't a member of the Lionhearts. The fact that he was the Grand Duke of a foreign country restrained Carmen from taking action. Carmen Lionheart possessed enough common sense to get that straight at least. But Eugene casually decided to ignore any such common sense. This was because he had Sienna with him. In the end, it might have been Eugene's decision to infiltrate the Laversia, but he was actually going to claim something otherwise when they eventually confronted the bewildered Ortis. Well, the wise Lady Sienna said, so what if we do kill that Lord Ortis? As a great hero from 300 years ago and the friend of their family's progenitor, once such a senior said something like that, they couldn't help but go along with her. Or at least that's how Eugene intended to pass it off. Sienna frowned. In that case, what shall we do? Should I just break open the barrier? Didn't you decide to handle this quietly if at all possible? Carmen politely reminded her. If things didn't go according to plan, they had also planned on just overwhelming the forces of the Laversia and forcefully taking control of the ship. However, that course of action was just prepared for the worst-case scenario. Carmen hoped that, if possible, they could handle this quietly. Without having to confront the full forces of the Laversia, they would only need to subdue Ortis, the commander of this expedition. If they managed to do that, it would be practically the same as having seized control of the Laversia. All right, Sienna said with a smile as she reached out with Frost. The mana in the air underwent a change. This was a sign that Sienna's signature spell, the Empress Rule, had just been cast. The magic barrier that protected Laversia might have been created by the Archwizard Maze himself, but it still couldn't disobey Sienna's Empress Rule. Let's head down, Sienna ordered once she was done. Eugene, Sienna, and Carmen were able to slip past the barrier without any incident as it failed to detect the intruders. Sienna narrowed her eyes as she looked down on the Laversia. Found him, she announced. Sienna had managed to detect Ortis's location. From that point onwards, everything was simple. The party managed to deceive the eyes of any watchers or guards and arrived at the door to the room where Ortis was staying. The three exchanged glances silently. Then they opened the door. Ortis Hyman was sitting on the other side of his office desk, apparently pondering something. Judging from how he was tapping the desk with a pen held in one hand, he appeared to have been writing something. Ortis looked up. The door had opened without any warning. Ortis blinked in surprise. He continued to stare blankly as 3 people walked through the now open door. Caught off guard, he wasn't able to immediately understand the surprising situation he was now in. 0. Of the 3 who had opened the door and entered his office, he recognized 2 of them. The first was Carmen Lionheart. But why was she here when she should be on another ship? No, if he thought about it, he could guess that she may have crossed over to his ship because she needed him for something, but what reason could she have for barging into his room without even knocking? 0. As for the man now closing the door, Ortis also recognized him. This was Eugene Lionheart. Hold on, Eugene Lionheart? He was meant to be in Kiel, so why had he shown up here along with Carmen? 3 days ago there had only been 3 Lionhearts sailing along with the fleet: Carmen, Seal and Desra. Apart from them, the Lionhearts had also sent 3 servants along, but none of those servants had been male. Also, who was that woman? With such vibrant purple hair, she definitely couldn't be regarded as an ordinary person. Her green eyes shone with amusement and she held a magic staff in one hand. Could she be a wizard? Was this actually the wise Sienna? 1. Ortis exclaimed, just what on earth? He still couldn't quite understand this situation. What were Eugene Lionheart and the wise Sienna, who were meant to be in Kiel, doing here? Also, why had Carmen brought those 2 here late at night without any warning? Hold on. They had come here without any warning? How was that possible? This ship, the Laversia, was covered by a magical barrier. If anyone had touched the barrier, the news would have automatically been transmitted to Ortis and Maze no matter what. So why wasn't I alerted? Ortis thought warily. They must have broken through the barrier. But whether it was from doing that to showing up in front of his door, he hadn't managed to notice their approach until they had opened the door to his office. No matter how focused he may have been, it didn't make sense that Ortis hadn't noticed the approach of such weighty existences. So Ortis instinctively felt a strong sense of danger and leaped up from his seat. Whoosh! Sienna sealed the room with a spell. Eugene and Carmen kicked off the ground at the same time without saying anything as they ran towards Ortis. Their first priority was to capture Ortis before doing anything else. You lunatics! Ortis cursed. How could they just attack him without saying anything? What on earth were they doing? Ortis regretted that he wasn't wearing his exit and that his sword had been set down far away from him. Even though he was still somewhat stunned, Ortis immediately prepared to defend himself. Ortis vaulted over his office desk as he came up with a plan. Let alone now, even if he had been in perfect condition, he didn't stand a chance of winning if he went up against those 2 head-on. Moreover, there was still the wise Sienna standing behind them. 0. He couldn't understand why they were attacking him. But since he didn't know their purpose for doing so, Ortis couldn't afford to take them lightly. Once a commotion was raised, alerting those outside his office that something was happening, the court wizard Maze and other reinforcements should arrive. That was what Ortis had decided to aim for. Boom. Ortis, who was covered in a huge amount of mana, charged at Eugene. This was because he had judged that Eugene should be weaker than Carmen. Well now, Eugene thought with a broad smile as he saw Ortis rapidly closing the distance between them.